Mom said I'm not welcome at Dad's party, so I brought Dad instead. She thought she could erase me from the story, rewrite history in her favor, but she forgot that blood is thicker than her social games. I walked into that party with more than just a name. I had my father's voice, his final wishes, and the documents that proved I was still his son in every way that mattered. She wanted to celebrate her triumph. I gave her a funeral for her lies. Tonight, the truth would be the only guest of honor. The words echoed in the sterile silence of my high-rise apartment, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of downtown Charleston 3,000 miles away. You are not welcome. Maxwell. The text message glowed on the screen of my phone, clinical and cruel. It was from Diana. She hadn't signed it. Of course, she never did. A queen doesn't need to announce her decrees with a signature. The message itself was her seal. Mom said I'm not welcome at Dad's party. I said the words aloud, the sound foreign and bitter in my mouth. I hadn't called her mom to her face in a decade, not since I was old enough to understand that her affection was a currency, spent only on what benefited her. But in my head, the title festered, a sarcastic epithet for the woman who had so skillfully and systematically replaced my own mother's memory, first in my father's house, and then, she hoped, in his heart. This wasn't just any party. It was for my father, Richard Harrison's 65th birthday. Or, more accurately, it was a memorial masquerading as a celebration. Dad had been gone for 6 months, and Diana, ever the master of optics, had decided that a grand, posthumous birthday gala was the most tasteful way to consolidate her power. The entire Charleston elite would be there: bankers, politicians, old money families who had known the Harrisons for generations, and the new money vultures she courted for Harrison Properties. It was a public coronation, and the first order of business was to affirm the exile of the rightful heir. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the glittering lights of the city below reflecting my own cold fury. For 5 years, I had built my own empire in international real estate, one skyscraper at a time. I had left Charleston not to abandon my father, but to escape Diana's suffocating influence, the constant low-grade poison she dripped into the family well. I'd needed to prove to myself, and to him, that I was more than just his son. And I had. My name, Maxwell Harrison, now carried its own weight in boardrooms from London to Tokyo. I wore a custom Savile Row suit, not as a costume, but as a uniform. I was confident, successful, and utterly alone. My calls with Dad had become our secret lifeline. He'd sound tired, his voice thinned by illness and the constant pressure of Diana's presence. But he would always brighten when I told him about a new deal, a new city. "That's my boy," he'd say, his pride a warm current across the cold distance, "building a world of your own." He never understood that I was only building it to be strong enough to one day come back and protect his. But I had been too late. His death was sudden, a heart attack in his sleep. Diana had called me with the news, her voice a perfect, rehearsed symphony of grief. She'd handled everything. She assured me the funeral was a quiet, private affair. It's what he would have wanted. Maxwell. No fuss. She knew I couldn't get back from Dubai in time. She had counted on it. She buried my father before I could even say goodbye. And now, this, a party to celebrate his life, from which his only son was explicitly barred. It was a power move, a public declaration that the Harrison line now ran through her. She was wiping the slate clean. She believed 5 years of distance and a closed-casket funeral were enough to sever my claim, to turn me into a forgotten footnote in the family history. She thought I would simply accept my disinheritance, cowed by her audacity and the weight of social propriety. She was wrong. I picked up my phone again, my reflection a sharp, determined silhouette against the glass. I didn't text back. I didn't call. Answering her would be playing her game. Instead, I booked a one-way ticket to Charleston. I walked to my closet and pulled out the briefcase I reserved for the most important negotiations of my life. It wasn't filled with deal proposals or architectural blueprints. It was filled with something far more powerful. Diana wanted a party without me. Fine. She could have one. But if she thought I was coming alone, she had fatally underestimated the man my father raised me to be. She told me I wasn't welcome, so I would bring the one guest she couldn't possibly turn away. I was bringing Dad. The flight to Charleston was a 5-hour descent into my own history. From 30,000 feet, the world I had built for myself of steel, glass, and ruthless efficiency seemed abstract. Below me lay the Low Country, a place of Spanish moss, old brick, and even older secrets. It was home, and it was enemy territory. Stepping out of the terminal, the humid air wrapped around me like a damp shroud, thick with the scent of salt water and jasmine. It was the smell of my childhood, a scent I now associated with loss. Diana entered our lives like a whisper. My mother had been gone a year, and the grand Harrison house on the Battery had become a mausoleum of grief. My father, a man who could command boardrooms and bend city planners to his will, was adrift. Diana Winters was a recent widow from a respectable, though not particularly wealthy, family. She was introduced to him at a charity benefit. She was beautiful, poised, and exuded a quiet strength that my father mistook for compassion. For a lonely man and a grieving boy, she was a lifeline. At first, her consolidation of power was a masterclass in subtlety. It started small, reorganizing the kitchen. The staff needs better direction. Richard, let me handle it. Then it was the social calendar. You're neglecting your friends, your connections. You can't let your mother's legacy fade. She positioned herself not as a replacement, but as a curator of my mother's memory, all while systematically erasing her. The photographs on the mantelpiece were rearranged, then slowly rotated out. My mother's favorite armchair was reupholstered in a cold, modern fabric. Diana never threw anything away. She simply improved it until it was unrecognizable. Her true target was always Harrison Properties. My father was the artist, the visionary. He saw skylines where others saw swampland. He loved the craft of building, the legacy of creating something permanent. He despised the daily grind of management, the petty politics, the endless paperwork. Diana thrived on it. She started by helping him organize his files. Soon, she was sitting in on meetings, offering shrewd, sometimes brutal, advice that cut through sentimentality and maximized profit. It's a beautiful, historic building. Richard, she'd say, her voice smooth as silk. But it's a financial black hole. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. He was tired. He was grateful. He let her take the reins, believing she was protecting his legacy. In reality, she was hijacking it. I was the one obstacle she couldn't reorganize. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them. I was my father's son, but I was my mother's child. I had her intuition, her skepticism. The tension between us grew from a silent chill to a palpable frost. She'd subtly undermined me in front of my father. Maxwell has his father's vision, she'd say to guests, a statement that sounded like a compliment, but was designed to frame me as a dreamer, not a doer. But he's still young. He doesn't yet appreciate the pragmatism required to run an empire like this. My decision to leave Charleston was the hardest of my life. I was 27. Watching my father recede, becoming a guest in his own life while Diana became its architect. I confronted him, told him she was isolating him, twisting his company into something he never intended. He didn't want to see it. She's been a rock. Max, you don't know what it's like. I realized then that I couldn't win a war on her ground. She controlled the house, the company, and the narrative. To save my father's legacy, I had to leave it. I had to build my own power, my own name, so that when I returned, I would be an equal, not a petulant son. Our phone calls were my only connection. In the last year, a new note of weariness had crept into his voice. During our final call, just a week before he died, he said something that I now understood was a final message. I've been going through the old plans, Max, the original ones, for the Seabrook Tower. You remember, the foundation is everything. People forget that. They look at the spire, but the foundation, that's what holds it all up. I made sure ours is solid. He'd paused, and his voice dropped. I made sure it belongs to the right architect. Now, driving the rented sedan through the familiar oak-lined streets, his words were a map. The party was being held at the estate. Of course. Where else would a queen hold her coronation? As I pulled up to a discreet service entrance a block away, I could see the glow, tents on the lawn, strings of fairy lights twinkling in the dusk, the distant murmur of a string quartet. It looked beautiful, a perfect facade, just like her. But facades, I knew, were the first thing to crumble when the foundation gave way. And I had brought the geological survey. I didn't use the service entrance. That was for staff, for caterers, for people who belonged on the periphery. This was my home, or it had been. I slipped through the wrought iron gate of the neighboring property old Mr. Abernathy's, who'd let me cut through his yard 1,000 times as a boy, and made my way to the back of the estate. Here, beyond the manicured perfection of the main lawn, the garden was wilder, overgrown with ancient magnolias and weeping willows. It was the part of the grounds Diana's sterile touch hadn't yet fully conquered. A narrow flagstone path, slick with moss, led to a set of French doors. They opened into my father's study, his sanctuary. The doors were locked, but a loose pane of glass in the one on the right had been a feature since I was a teenager, a relic of a poorly thrown baseball. I slipped my fingers inside, found the latch, and opened it with a faint click. The room was dark, but the sounds of the party, the lilt of the string quartet, the bright peals of champagne-fueled laughter felt a world away. The air was thick with the familiar scent of old leather and my father's pipe tobacco, but underneath it was a foreign, cloying note. Diana's perfume, a trespass. I moved silently to the main door of the study, which stood slightly ajar, offering a sliver of light and a direct view into the main hall where Diana was holding court. She was a vision in emerald green, a glass of champagne in one hand, her other resting on the arm of a man I recognized with a sickening jolt, Arthur Vance, our family's lawyer for 40 years, a man who had bounced me on his knee, who my father had trusted with everything. The timing is perfect. Arthur, Diana was saying, her voice a low, confident purr, announcing the sale of the Seabrook Tower project tonight, framed as Richard's final pragmatic decision. It's poetic. My blood ran cold. The Seabrook Tower. The project my father had called his masterpiece, the one he'd mentioned in our last call, his foundation. Arthur shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Diana, are you certain? To announce it at his birthday memorial, some might see it as unseemly, and without consulting Maxwell. Diana laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. Maxwell consulted himself right out of this family 5 years ago. Richard was heartbroken. In his final months, he saw the wisdom of my approach. He realized the project was too ambitious, too sentimental. He knew it needed a firm hand, not a dreamer's touch. She squeezed Arthur's arm, her painted nails digging slightly into his sleeve. Richard's dying wish was to secure the company's future, not to chase old ghosts. We are honoring him by selling to a consortium that will actually get it built. It's a clean break, and once the deal is finalized, Any lingering claims Maxwell might imagine he has will be utterly moot. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it stole my breath. She wasn't just disinheriting me. She was performing a posthumous character assassination on my father, painting him as a weak, defeated man who had surrendered his life's work. She was using his memory as a shield for her greed. She was twisting his love for me into a narrative of disappointment and abandonment. This party wasn't just a coronation. It was a public desecration. Arthur, to his eternal shame, just nodded. The board is in agreement. The preliminary offer is substantial. Of course it is, Diana said, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. I negotiated it. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The anger I'd felt on the plane was a pale, flimsy thing compared to the cold, diamond-hard fury that was crystallizing in my chest. This wasn't about being unwelcomed. This wasn't just about money or real estate. This was about the truth. She was trying to steal my father's soul, to remold him in her own image, a man who valued profit over passion, pragmatism over legacy. The briefcase I'd left just inside the French doors suddenly felt 10 times heavier. My initial plan had been to make a dramatic entrance, to confront her with the legal documents, to expose her financial machinations, but that was a battle of ledgers and laws. She had escalated it. She had made it a battle for my father's very identity. My evidence had to be more than just legal. It had to be personal. It had to be undeniable. It had to be his voice, not just his signature. I slipped back out into the humid night, the distant party music now sounding like a funeral dirge. The game had changed. My quiet arrival had just become the calm before a storm I would personally unleash. She wanted to frame the narrative around Richard's dying wish fine. I would give everyone here tonight exactly that. I crept back into the suffocating quiet of the study. The distant laughter from the lawn seemed to mock the tomb-like silence of this room. My father's presence was everywhere and nowhere at once. This was his sanctuary, the one place where he could be Richard Harrison, the architect, not the figurehead Diana paraded around. And it was here, I knew, that I would find his final words. She could redecorate the house, but she could not redecorate his soul. My eyes scanned the room, not for what was there, but for what might be hidden. My father was a man of layers, of hidden compartments, both in his buildings and in his life. I ran my hands along the familiar mahogany bookshelves, the spines of books on architectural theory and history feeling like old friends. Then I remembered his last words to me. The foundation is everything. I made sure ours is solid. It wasn't just a metaphor. He was giving me a clue. I walked to the large antique architect's desk that dominated the room. Its surface was unnaturally tidy, cleared of the usual chaotic mess of blueprints and sketches, Diana's work. But the desk itself was a fortress, built of heavy oak in the 19th century. I knelt down, my hands exploring the intricate carvings on the base. On the left pedestal, behind a decorative scrollwork panel, I found it. Not a button, but a section of the wood that depressed slightly under pressure. A soft thunk echoed in the room as a false panel on the front of the pedestal sprang open, revealing a small, built-in safe. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the combination. It was my mother's birthday. I spun the dial, the clicks sounding like gunshots in the silence. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there was no cash, no jewelry. There was only my father. The first thing I saw was a thick, leather-bound journal. His journal. I opened it, my hands trembling. The last few entries, dated in the weeks leading up to his death, were written in a spidery, weakened hand, but the words were lucid and sharp. October 12th. Diana presented the offer for Seabrook today. A hostile bid masked as a partnership. She spoke of pragmatism. She doesn't understand. That tower isn't about profit. It's a love letter to this city, to his mother, to Max. She sees a building. I see a legacy. October 19th. She thinks I'm a fool, tired and weak. Perhaps I am. But I'm not blind. I see how she looks at me, at the company, like a prize she has already won. I spoke to Max today, hearing his voice. It gives me strength. He is building his own world. I must ensure the one I am leaving him is not a ruin. October 25th. It is done. Arthur fought me on it, said it was rash, unconventional, but he is a man of law, not of legacy. He doesn't understand that some things must be protected from the law itself. The foundation is secure. It belongs to the architect now, all of it. He will know what to do. Tears blurred my vision. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. This wasn't just a business dispute. It was the story of my father's lonely, silent battle. Beneath the journal lay a thick manila envelope. Inside were the originals of the documents I had copies of in my briefcase, the legally executed, notarized transfer of the controlling shares of Harrison Properties and the deeds to the core family real estate, including the Seabrook plot, directly to me. Signed and dated 6 weeks before he died. He had been so far ahead of her. But there was one last item at the bottom of the safe, a small, silver USB drive. I knew what it was before I even plugged it into my father's desktop computer. I put on his headphones, the worn leather cool against my skin, and clicked the single video file. My father's face filled the screen. He looked gaunt, tired, the shadows under his eyes telling a story of sleepless nights and a heavy heart. But his eyes, when he looked into the camera, were the ones I remembered clear, intelligent, and filled with a fierce, unwavering love. Maxwell, he began, his voice raspy but firm. If you are seeing this, it means I'm gone. And it means Diana is making her move. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry I let it get this far. I was tired, and I let my guard down. I thought I could manage her, but I underestimated her ambition. He took a shaky breath. She will tell you, and the world, that I lost my way, that I gave up on my dreams. She will try to sell Seabrook. She will try to sell everything I ever loved. She will say it was my dying wish. He leaned closer to the camera, his gaze piercing. That is a lie. My dying wish is you, Max. My wish is for you to come home and lead this company the way I always knew you could, with integrity, with vision, with heart. He gestured to the side. The documents transfer ownership. They are legally binding. But this is my testament. This is the truth. Don't let her steal our story. Son, don't let her tarnish your mother's memory or the name of this family. Fight for it. Use this. Show them. Show her. His voice broke for a moment. I am so proud of the man you've become, Maxwell. So proud. Now, go get our company back. The foundation is yours. The screen went black. I sat there in the dark. The silence of the room a hollow echo of his last words. The grief was a tidal wave, but for the first time, it didn't drown me. It forged me. The emotional conflict within me, the hurt, the anger, the sorrow collapsed into a single point of cold, hard clarity. This was my turning point. My decision was made. My father had given me the blueprints, the legal deeds, and the weapon. Diana wanted to host a party for my father's memory. I was about to give her one she would never forget. I didn't storm out of the study. I walked. Each step was deliberate, measured, the briefcase in one hand, my phone queued up in the other. I strode through the main hall, past the stunned faces of servants who hadn't seen me in 5 years, and headed directly for the grand terrace where the heart of the party pulsed. The string quartet was playing something light and airy, a jarringly cheerful soundtrack to the execution I was about to perform. All heads turned as I emerged from the house. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw old family friends, business rivals, city council members, the entire ecosystem of Charleston society. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and curiosity. I was the ghost at the feast. And then I saw her. Diana was standing on a small, elevated platform, a microphone in her hand, Arthur Vance at her side like a well-trained dog. She was just about to begin her speech. Our eyes met across the perfectly manicured lawn. For a split second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock crossed her features before being instantly replaced by a mask of cold fury. Her grip on the microphone tightened. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice amplified, smooth and unwavering despite the tremor of rage I knew was coursing through her. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the life of my beloved husband, Richard Harrison." She paused, letting a moment of feigned solemnity wash over the crowd. Richard was a visionary, but he was also a pragmatist. In his final days, his greatest concern was securing the future of the company he built. That is why, in his honor, and as his final directive, I am announcing tonight, that's a lie, my voice, unamplified, cut through the night air like a shard of glass. It wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. The quartet faltered, the music dying with a discordant scrape of strings. Every eye was now on me. Diana's face hardened. "Maxwell, I believe I made it clear you are not welcome here. This is a private event. Security? Your security can't throw out the owner of the property," I said, taking another step forward. The crowd gasped. "And this isn't a private event. This is a fraudulent shareholders meeting designed to illegally ratify the sale of an asset you have no authority to sell." I was now standing at the foot of the platform. I looked at Arthur Vance, whose face had gone a chalky white. "Arthur, you were my father's lawyer. Did you or did you not oversee the transfer of controlling interest in Harrison Properties to me on October 25th? Arthur stammered, looking at Diana, then at me. A man trapped between his complicity and his conscience. Diana seized the microphone. "This is absurd. My stepson is clearly unwell, grieving in his own destructive way. He is trying to disrupt this beautiful memorial to his father." "You want to talk about my father?" I interrupted, my voice rising, imbued with the raw emotion from the video. "You want to talk about his dying wish? You dare stand here and paint him as a man who gave up." I held up my phone. "I think we should let him speak for himself." Before she could react, I connected my phone to the portable Bluetooth speaker of the quartet's sound system. The hiss of the connection was followed by a moment of silence, and then my father's voice filled the night. "Maxwell, if you are seeing this, it means I'm gone. And it means Diana is making her move." A collective shockwave went through the crowd. This wasn't an anonymous recording. It was Richard Harrison. His face, his voice, his pain broadcast for everyone to see on the small screen of my phone, but his voice echoing for all to hear. Diana froze, her face a mask of horror. The blood drained from her face, leaving only her perfectly applied makeup looking garish and hollow. The audio played on. "She will tell you, and the world, that I lost my way. That is a lie. My dying wish is you, Max." When he spoke of his pride in me, a sob escaped someone in the crowd, one of my father's old friends. When the recording finished, a profound, damning silence descended upon the party. The facade had not just cracked, it had been atomized. Everyone had heard it. The truth, in the victim's own words. Diana finally broke, her voice a venomous hiss. "This is a deepfake. It's a trick. He's a liar. a parasite who abandoned his father and has come back to steal what isn't his. "Is this a fake?" I asked, my voice calm. I opened the briefcase. I didn't take out the legal documents. I took out the leather-bound journal. I held it up. "Is his personal journal, with entries detailing your every move. A fake is the sworn, notarized testimony from his personal nurse about his state of mind. A fake." I placed it on the platform at her feet. "And are these," I said, finally producing the original, "sealed property deeds and share certificates, a fake signed by him, witnessed by 2 partners from a rival law firm, because he no longer trusted his own, and filed with the county clerk's office 7 weeks ago." I turned from her and addressed the crowd, my voice ringing with the authority my father had just bestowed upon me. "This party is over. However, the first official shareholder meeting of the new Harrison Properties will be held tomorrow morning. All legitimate partners are welcome. As for the consortium looking to buy the Seabrook Tower, consider your offer officially and permanently rejected. That tower will be built, as my father envisioned it." I looked back at Diana. The Queen had been dethroned in her own court. Her composure was shattered, replaced by a raw, ugly desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, to threaten, to scream, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. She had been exposed not just as a thief, but as a liar who had desecrated the memory of the man she claimed to love in front of the very people whose validation she craved. It was a complete and total annihilation. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. It was the silence of a shattered illusion. The twinkling fairy lights suddenly seemed garish, the lavish food displays obscene. The party, so carefully constructed to cement Diana's reign, had become her public pillory. No one looked at me. All eyes were on the woman on the platform, a queen without a crown, stripped bare not by force, but by truth. Diana didn't scream or collapse. Her reaction was somehow worse. She simply stood there, frozen, as the guests began to leave. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic goodbyes. They just melted away into the night. A quiet, orderly exodus of people desperate to distance themselves from the wreckage. They took with them the most valuable currency in a city like Charleston, reputation, and Diana's was now worthless. Arthur Vance had been one of the first to go, scurrying away like a rat from a sinking ship, avoiding my gaze. His career was over. I would see to that. Finally, only she and I were left on the vast, empty lawn, littered with the abandoned remnants of her ambition. The string quartet had packed up their instruments and vanished. The caterers worked in hushed, awkward efficiency. The battle was over. She finally looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not hatred, not anger, but a hollow, barren emptiness. The fire was gone. "He loved me," she whispered, the words barely audible. It wasn't a defiant statement, but a question, a desperate plea for a reality that had just been proven false. "He tolerated you," I replied, my voice devoid of the triumph I thought I would feel. There was only a profound, weary sadness. He was lonely, and you were a port in a storm. But you weren't the harbor. You tried to own his legacy because you knew you never truly owned his heart. I left her there, a solitary figure amidst the debris of her own making. I didn't need to banish her or threaten legal action beyond what was necessary to reclaim the company assets. Society would do the rest. In Charleston, a scandal like this was a social death sentence. She would become a ghost, haunting the drawing rooms and country clubs she once commanded. A cautionary tale whispered over cocktails. A fate for a woman like Diana, far worse than prison. The next morning, the boardroom at Harrison Properties was full. The partners, the senior staff, the few remaining board members who hadn't been Diana's cronies, they were all there. Their faces were grim, uncertain. They were expecting a purge, a hostile takeover by a son they barely knew. I walked in, not in the armor of a Savile Row suit, but in a simple dress shirt. Sleeves rolled up, I didn't take the seat at the head of the table, my father's seat. I stood at the front of the room, beside the easel that still held the schematics for the Seabrook Tower. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "There are going to be changes. We are not selling Seabrook. We are not selling any of our foundational properties. We are not a company that liquidates dreams for a quick profit. That is not the Harrison way." I looked around the room, meeting each person's eye. My father lost his way in these last few years, clouded by grief and by influence that did not have his or our best interests at heart. But his vision never faltered. His foundation, as he called it, is sound. I spent the next hour not talking about firing people, but about building. I talked about my father's original plans, about integrating modern, sustainable technology with his classic architectural principles. I talked about my own experience in the international market, not as a weapon, but as a tool we could now use to elevate the Harrison name globally. I wasn't tearing down Diana's structure. I was renovating the entire building from the foundation up, using my father's original blueprints. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had transformed. The fear was replaced by a tentative excitement, the uncertainty by a renewed sense of purpose. I hadn't just won a war. I had started to win the peace. That evening, I didn't go back to a hotel. I went home, to the house on the Battery. It was quiet, the staff moving with a renewed, lighter energy. I walked into the study and sat at my father's desk. The briefcase was gone, its purpose served. The journal lay open. I picked up a pen, and on a fresh page, I wrote a single sentence. November 2nd. I'm home. Dad. The fight was over, but the work of rebuilding a company, of restoring a name, of truly honoring my father's legacy was just beginning. He had given me back my past, and in doing so, he had given me my future. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I was building it alone.